Ditzy rich girl disrespects black judge in court. His sentence leaves everyone speechless. The Montgomery name commanded respect in Boston, or at least the fear that passed for it. Vanessa Montgomery strutted through the courthouse metal detectors in Christian Louboutin heels that cost more than most people's monthly rent, barely acknowledging the security officer who asked her to remove her designer sunglasses. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail, accentuating sharp cheekbones and ice blue eyes that rarely warmed with genuine emotion. Before I go on, I would really appreciate it if you give this video a like, click the subscribe button down below. It would really encourage me to create more videos for you. Thank you so much. Alright, let's continue. Courtroom 4B, her attorney, James Whitfield, murmured, glancing nervously at his gold watch. We're cutting it close, Miss Montgomery. Judge Williams is known for his punctuality. Vanessa rolled her eyes, tapping away at her phone. Daddy says all judges in this district can be handled with the right consideration. She emphasized the word with a knowing smirk. Besides, what's the worst that can happen? A fine? A stern talking to? Please. The courtroom fell silent as they entered, but Vanessa barely noticed. Her reckless driving charge, doing 95 in a school zone while texting, was merely an inconvenience in her carefully curated life. She'd expected her father's team of lawyers to have dismissed it already. Instead, here she was forced to appear in person like a common criminal. Judge Marcus Williams observed the young woman's entrance from the bench, his dark eyes missing nothing. At 62, he carried himself with the dignity earned through decades of service. The son of a housekeeper and a factory worker, he'd worked his way through night school to become the first black judge in this district. 30 years on the bench had taught him to read people within seconds, and what he saw in Vanessa Montgomery troubled him deeply. The state versus Vanessa Montgomery, the bailiff announced as Vanessa slouched into her seat, still scrolling through her Instagram feed. Judge Williams cleared his throat. Miss Montgomery, I'll need your full attention in my courtroom. Phones away, please. Vanessa looked up, irritation flashing across her face. She put her phone down with theatrical slowness. Whatever you say, she muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Miss Montgomery faces charges of reckless endangerment and excessive speeding in a school zone, the prosecutor stated. The state recommends the maximum fine plus. Listen, Vanessa interrupted, standing abruptly. Can we just get to the part where I write a check? I have a charity luncheon at 2. And Daddy's waiting for me to sign some papers for our new development project. A hushed shock rippled through the courtroom. Judge Williams's expression remained impassive, but his hand tightened almost imperceptibly around his pen. Miss Montgomery, he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent room, perhaps you misunderstand the seriousness of these proceedings. You were caught driving nearly triple the speed limit while texting, in a school zone, at dismissal time. Your actions endangered children's lives. Vanessa sighed dramatically. But nothing happened. No one was hurt. By sheer luck, Judge Williams countered. The law exists to prevent tragedy, not merely to punish it after the fact. Something in his tone finally penetrated Vanessa's bored facade. She straightened, fixing the judge with a cold stare. Look, I think we all know how this works. My father's company employs half this city. Maybe in whatever neighborhood you came from, people don't understand how the real world operates, but Miss Montgomery. Her lawyer grabbed her arm, face ashen. The courtroom had gone deadly quiet. Judge Williams set down his pen with careful precision. When he spoke, his voice was measured, controlled. I believe I now understand exactly who Vanessa Montgomery is. He paused, studying her with eyes that seemed to see straight through her. And I believe a standard fine would teach you nothing of value. Vanessa's smirk faltered for the first time. 500 hours of community service, Judge Williams pronounced, to be served at the Williams Community Center in Roxbury. No substitutions, no buying your way out. You will report there tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp. He brought his gavel down with a crack that echoed through the stunned courtroom. And Miss Montgomery? I suggest you wear more appropriate shoes. He can't do this to me. Vanessa's voice echoed through the mahogany-paneled office of Montgomery Developments. Her father, Richard Montgomery, stood at the floor-to-ceiling. Windows overlooking the Boston skyline, a panorama of property that bore his influence. Daddy, are you listening? Some judge thinks he can order me to work in a slum. Richard turned, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. Marcus Williams, he said, the name rolling off his tongue like something distasteful. I should have known. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, ignoring his daughter's outburst. James called. Said you made quite the spectacle. Vanessa collapsed into a leather chair. Can't you just handle it? Make a call or something? Richard studied his glass. Williams isn't like the others. Old school, incorruptible. Been a thorn in my side for years. He took a measured sip. Ironically, that community center sits on the last block we need for the Roxbury Heights development. Been trying to get those people out for months. The coincidence wasn't lost on Vanessa. So this is personal? He's using me to get back at you. Perhaps, Richard mused, though I doubt he knows you're personally involved in the project. He hadn't mentioned that Vanessa's signature was on several questionable eviction notices. Her contribution to the family business through a special executive training program that mostly involved signing documents without reading them. The next morning, Vanessa's Ferrari screeched to a halt outside the Williams Community Center. The building stood defiant amidst blocks of neglect, a 3-story brick structure with peeling paint but clean windows. Children's artwork decorated the entrance, a cheerful contrast to the decay surrounding it. Vanessa checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting her designer sunglasses. She'd deliberately ignored the judge's advice about appropriate attire, opting for white linen pants and a silk blouse, clothes that screamed, "I don't belong here." As she stepped out, the morning humidity immediately assaulted her carefully straightened hair. "You're late," a deep voice called from the entrance. A tall man with broad shoulders and penetrating brown eyes stood with arms crossed. 8:15. Community service starts at 8 sharp. Vanessa waved dismissively. Traffic. From Beacon Hill? At this hour? The man's eyebrow arched. I'm Darius Jackson, Center Director. Judge Williams called me personally about you. Inside, the center hummed with activity despite the early hour. Seniors gathered for breakfast in one room, while children's voices echoed from another. The walls, though worn, were covered with photographs, decades of community history preserved in black and white. This center's been here 50 years, Darius explained, leading her through the maze of rooms. Started by Judge Williams' mother when the neighborhood was abandoned by the city. Now it's the only thing standing between these people and your father's wrecking ball. Vanessa stopped short. You know who I am. Everyone here knows the Montgomery name, Darius replied coldly. Your father's company has been buying up buildings, letting them deteriorate until they're condemned, forcing families out. Classic gentrification playbook. He handed her a mop and bucket. Today you'll clean the senior center floors. Tomorrow, you'll help serve breakfast. Judge Williams was very specific. You're to experience every aspect of what this place means to the community. As Vanessa awkwardly maneuvered the mop, an elderly woman approached, her back stooped but eyes sharp. You're cleaning all wrong, child, she said, taking the mop. Like this, see? Her weathered hands demonstrated with surprising strength. I'm Esther Johnson. Been coming here since Miss Loretta, that's the judge's mama, opened these doors. Used to own a beautiful house 3 blocks over, until some fancy company bought our building and found ways to push us all out. She fixed Vanessa with a knowing look. Montgomery Development, it was called. Any relation? Vanessa's cheeks burned as she took back the mop, avoiding Esther's gaze. From across the room, Darius watched the interaction, his expression unreadable. Later, as he showed her to the supply closet, he paused by a faded photograph on the wall. A young Marcus Williams standing beside a dignified older woman in front of the newly opened center. Judge Williams grew up in this neighborhood, Darius said quietly. His grandmother lost everything to predatory developers. That's why he became a judge, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. He turned to Vanessa, his eyes challenging. 499 hours to go, Miss Montgomery. I hope you're a quick learner. 3 weeks into her sentence, Vanessa's hands had developed calluses her manicurist would weep over. She'd fallen into a rhythm at the center, morning meal prep with Esther and the seniors, afternoon tutoring with the neighborhood children, and evening cleanup. Today, however, Darius had assigned her to help organize the center's cluttered storage room. These boxes haven't been touched in years, Darius said, flicking on the light. Judge Williams asked us to digitize the old records, but we've never had the time. He checked his watch. I have a meeting with the city about our funding. You'll be alone for a few hours. Vanessa nodded, her usual sharp retort absent. Something had shifted in her over these weeks. The children's unguarded affection, Esther's grudging respect as she mastered making cornbread the proper way. These small victories had begun to matter in ways she couldn't explain. When the door closed behind Darius, Vanessa rolled up her sleeves. No designer clothes today, just jeans and a faded Harvard t-shirt, and began tackling the mountain of dusty boxes. Halfway through the afternoon, she discovered a file labeled Montgomery Development Corporation. Curiosity piqued. She opened it to find newspaper clippings, letters, and legal documents spanning decades. The earliest was a foreclosure notice for 1253 Maple Street, Esther's former address. Attached was a building inspection report claiming dangerous structural deficiencies. A sticky note in neat handwriting read, "Fabricated. Building was sound." Her stomach clenched as she dug deeper. More inspection reports, all from properties her father's company had acquired, all with the same pattern: trumped-up violations followed by eviction notices. Most disturbing was a memo on Montgomery letterhead outlining a strategy to accelerate neighborhood transition by cutting off heating to certain buildings during winter, ignoring maintenance requests, and allowing strategic water damage to encourage voluntary relocation. At the bottom of one page was her own signature, authorizing these tactics for the Roxbury Heights project. She remembered signing it, barely glancing at the contents when her father had called it standard redevelopment procedure. Cold shame washed over her as faces flashed in her mind. Esther, the children who lived in crowded apartments because their families had been displaced, the elderly men who played chess in the center because they had nowhere else to go. The sound of the door opening startled her. "Finding anything interesting?" Darius asked, his expression guarded as he noticed the open file. "Did you know?" Vanessa held up the documents. "Did you put me on this task deliberately?" Darius sat beside her on the dusty floor. "Judge Williams suggested it. Said sometimes the truth needs to find its way into the light." He took the memo with her signature. "Did you know what you were authorizing?" Vanessa shook her head, tears threatening. "I thought I was learning the business." Daddy said. She trailed off, the explanation sounding hollow even to her own ears. "Your father's company has filed for expedited demolition permits," Darius said quietly. "This center will be bulldozed in 30 days unless someone stops it." He studied her face. "The question is, now that you know, what are you going to do about it?" That evening, dinner at the Montgomery mansion was a tense affair. Richard watched his daughter push food around her plate. "You look tired, sweetheart. These community service hours taking a toll? I could have another word with the judge." "I found the Roxbury files today," Vanessa said abruptly. "The real ones. About what we're doing to those people." Richard's expression hardened. "Business is business, Vanessa. You can't build the new without clearing out the old. Those people will be fine." "Those people have names," Vanessa countered, her voice stronger than she expected. "Esther Johnson lost her home of 40 years because we falsified reports. Mrs. Diaz's grandson has asthma because we let black mold grow in their apartment to force them out. And now you want to demolish the only place giving them any support." Her father's laugh was cold. "Listen to yourself. 2 weeks in that neighborhood and you've gone soft. This is why women don't belong in real estate development." He slid a folder across the table. "I need your signature on the final demolition papers. The judge's little punishment exercise ends tomorrow." Vanessa stared at the folder, then at her father. For the first time, she saw him clearly, not as the powerful businessman she'd idolized, but as the predator Judge Williams had recognized all along. Her hand trembled as she reached for the documents, but instead of signing, she stood up. "I need time to think." "Don't think too long," Richard called after her retreating form. "The bulldozers arrive Monday whether you've made peace with it or not." Vanessa spent the night poring over the documents she'd smuggled from the center. Her father's systematic destruction of the neighborhood was laid bare in spreadsheets and memos, a cold calculus of profit margins against human displacement. By dawn, she'd made her decision. She wouldn't just refuse to sign, she would fight back. She arrived at the community center earlier than usual, clutching a thick folder. Darius was alone, preparing for the morning breakfast program. "I need your help," Vanessa said without preamble, spreading the documents across a table. "There are legal violations in almost everything my father's company has done in this neighborhood. Building code manipulation, falsified inspections, deliberately created health hazards, all documented by your center, but buried in those storage boxes." Darius studied her face, searching for sincerity. "Why now? Why help us?" "Because I was wrong," Vanessa admitted, the words foreign on her tongue. "And because my signature is on documents I didn't understand. I'm complicit." She pointed to a building schematic. "My father needs my signature on the final demolition order by tomorrow. Without it, there's a gap in his legal chain of ownership." Together, they formulated a plan. Vanessa would stall her father, while Darius contacted a friendly city councilor and rallied community support. With her insider knowledge and his community organizing skills, they might buy enough time to file legal challenges. As they worked side by side, something shifted between them, respect replacing animosity, possibility flickering where judgment had been. That afternoon, Vanessa stepped into her father's office with newfound purpose. Richard Montgomery reclined behind his mahogany desk, confident in his control. "There's my girl," he smiled, pushing the demolition papers forward. "Just your signature needed, then we break ground next week. The investors are thrilled." "I visited the city planning office this morning," Vanessa replied calmly, setting down her coffee. "Seems there are questions about the inspection reports we submitted. Someone's filed a formal complaint." Richard's smile faltered. "A minor delay. Our lawyers will handle it." The complaint included internal memos. "Our memos, Daddy." Vanessa met his gaze steadily. "I can't sign these papers." Her father's transformation was immediate, the paternal mask slipping to reveal cold fury. "You ungrateful little," he caught himself, voice lowering to a dangerous growl. "You think your bleeding heart will save those people? I built this company from nothing. Everything you have, your education, your car, your trust fund, comes from these deals." "Maybe I don't want those things anymore," Vanessa said quietly. Richard's laugh was brittle. "Then you'll have nothing. I'll cut you off completely." His eyes narrowed. "And your little judge friend? I've already set things in motion. Board of Judicial Review will be investigating his inappropriate sentencing practices by week's end. Career-ending stuff." Horror washed over Vanessa. "You can't do that. Watch me." Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced down, then smiled coldly. "That's my contact at City Hall. Emergency demolition order just approved. Safety concerns, you understand. No signatures needed after all." He stood, straightening his tie. "Bulldozers roll at dawn tomorrow. Your little rebellion accomplished nothing except getting yourself disinherited." Vanessa's mind raced. Safety concerns? The building passed inspection last month. Then realization dawned. "You bribed someone to declare it unsafe." Richard pocketed his phone. "Prove it." His voice dropped to a whisper. "This is how the real world works, Vanessa. The strong do what they must, the weak suffer what they must. I thought I taught you that. Before I go on, I would really appreciate it if you give this video a like, click the subscribe button down below. It would really encourage me to create more videos for you. Thank you so much. Alright, let's continue." Something inside Vanessa hardened into resolve. As her father turned to pour himself a celebratory scotch, she slipped her phone from her pocket, tapped the screen, and set it on his desk. "You taught me more than you know." Richard froze at the sight of the recording app running, 37:42 and counting. Every word captured, every threat preserved. "You wouldn't," he breathed, reaching for the phone. Vanessa snatched it away, backing toward the door. "Watch me," she echoed his words, heart pounding. "You have until morning to call off the demolition, or this recording goes to the district attorney." She paused at the threshold. "And Daddy, I just learned something else from you. Always have leverage." The crystal tumbler shattered against the door as it closed behind her, liquid seeping under the crack like tears. 3 months later, Vanessa Montgomery sat in courtroom 4B once again. This time, she wasn't slouched in designer clothes but sat straight-backed in a modest navy suit, her hair pulled back simply, all pretense stripped away. The courtroom buzzed with journalists and spectators. The Montgomery case had become the biggest corruption scandal to hit Boston in decades. Judge Marcus Williams entered, and the room rose in unison. As he took his seat, his eyes briefly met Vanessa's, no words needed between them. The bailiff called the case, Commonwealth versus Richard Montgomery and Montgomery Development Corporation. At the defense table, Richard Montgomery sat hollow-eyed beside his attorney, his empire crumbling around him. The district attorney had uncovered a web of corruption far beyond what even Vanessa had known. Bribes to city officials, environmental violations, tax fraud spanning decades. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "the state calls Vanessa Montgomery to the stand." A ripple of whispers followed her as she walked forward, took the oath, and faced the courtroom. The prosecutor guided her through her testimony. The discovered documents, the recording of her father admitting to bribery and retaliation plans against Judge Williams, the systematic targeting of vulnerable communities. Throughout, Richard stared at her with cold hatred, but Vanessa didn't flinch. "And what happened after you provided these recordings to the authorities?" the prosecutor asked. The investigation revealed that my father had been falsifying documents and bribing officials for years, Vanessa replied clearly. The emergency demolition order for the Williams Community Center was revoked. I've since transferred my shares in Montgomery Development to a community trust to provide affordable housing and support for displaced residents. She paused. I've also been working full-time at the center, continuing my community service hours voluntarily. When cross-examination came, Richard's lawyer attacked viciously. Isn't it true that you turned on your father only after he threatened to cut you off financially? That this supposed moral awakening conveniently coincided with your personal interests? Vanessa didn't hesitate. I made the right choice for the wrong reasons at first, she admitted. But Judge Williams saw something in me I couldn't see myself. He didn't sentence me to community service as punishment. He sentenced me to growth. After final arguments, Judge Williams addressed the court. Richard Montgomery, this court finds you guilty on all counts. You used your wealth and influence not to build up our city, but to corrupt its institutions and exploit its most vulnerable citizens. His voice remained measured but carried moral force. I sentence you to 7 years in federal prison and order restitution payments of $50 million to the communities damaged by your actions. As officers led Richard away, he locked eyes with his daughter one final time, a look of defeat that held no forgiveness. Vanessa felt the weight of it, but remained standing. Outside the courthouse, camera flashes greeted her as she emerged alongside Darius, whose hand found hers in a brief, supportive squeeze. What happens now? A reporter called out. Will you rebuild the Montgomery name? Vanessa shook her head. The Montgomery name isn't what matters. What matters is rebuilding trust and homes. She nodded toward Darius. The community trust is already working with residents to create housing they can afford and businesses they can own. As for me, I'm exactly where I need to be. 6 months later, Judge Williams parked his car outside the renovated Williams Community Center. The old brick building now anchored a thriving neighborhood where previously displaced residents were returning to new affordable housing units. Through the window, he could see Vanessa leading a financial literacy class for teens, her animated gestures a far cry from the entitled young woman who had strutted into his courtroom. He smiled to himself, thinking of his mother Loretta, who had founded this place with the belief that everyone deserved a chance to reveal their better selves. As he watched Vanessa high-five a student who had solved a problem, he knew his mother would approve of the sentence he'd handed down. Not just justice, but transformation. Some lessons couldn't be taught with fines or jail time, but required something far more challenging. Seeing yourself through new eyes. The true punishment had become Vanessa's salvation, and in that poetic reversal, perfect justice had been served.